Good afternoon. Welcome to Independent Sector's June monthly policy update. We will give people just a moment to filter in, and we'll get started. I feel like we always have a lot to discuss on this call, but certainly there is even more in the air than there usually is for the charitable sector and the people it serves. So let's get started. Again, welcome to Independent Sector's June monthly policy update. I'm Ben Kershaw. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations here at IS. I'm joined by Wes Coulomb, our close partner at Washington Counsel Ernst & Young, and by my tireless government relations colleague at IS, Travis Swanson. If you're joining us for the first time on an IS webinar, welcome. Independent Sector is a national membership organization representing charities, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure all people living in the United States can thrive. Some housekeeping notes off the top. This is a webinar, so your lines are muted. We'll pause for questions. We suggest you put them in the Q&A box whenever you are comfortable. You're also welcome to put banter and comments into the chat function. This webinar is usually a monthly benefit for independent sector members. So if you're not a member of IS and you're with us today, we hope you will stick around. And if you like what you see, please contact membership@independentsector.org so that you can stay part of this community. Before we start today, I want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you from Washington, D.C. It's the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who are still in the area working to reclaim their land and their traditional practices. Also, many of the buildings and the places we inhabit here in Washington, D.C. were built by enslaved people. So wherever you are joining us from, again, we're really glad to have you. And we have a lot to discuss today. If you have looked at a newspaper or a website in the last month, you're probably aware that Republicans in Congress are working really hard to pass comprehensive tax and spending legislation. And we're lucky every day that we can turn to Wes and his team at Washington Counsel to give us updates. And now it's your turn to get an update from Wes about sort of the latest on what's happening on Capitol Hill. We'll start on this big bill, and we'll go from there. So over to you, Wes.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I think a lot of waiting at the moment to see what happens next. We saw the release, of course, last week of Chairman Crapo's tax title to the One Big Beautiful Bill in the Senate. They have all the pieces now been released as of last week. The process now is really kind of fine-tuning the various components of the bill before they go to the Senate floor for actual debate and Senate votes. The process right now that's being part of the holdup is what's called the bird bath, where they kind of have meetings with the parliamentarian and they go through the provisions of the bill to make sure they comply with the reconciliation rules, including the bird rule that has various requirements for provisions to meet before they can be included in the reconciliation bill, not to a point of order or stricken on the Senate floor. So that process is ongoing. You've seen various reports come out on various pieces, including just recently some of the healthcare portions of the bill regarding Medicaid were stricken, and they have to go back and redraft some of those to make them compliant with the bird rule before they go to the floor. We're also kind of in the wait and see mode on the tax portion of the bill, where the Democrats have been meeting with the parliamentarian to raise concerns about some of the tax provisions in the portion of the Finance Committee bill. We have not seen rulings from the parliamentarian yet on the tax components, and we expect those to come out soon. And once they do finish up the bird bath, as I mentioned, and the conversation with the parliamentarian, I think they'll be ready to redraft the bill and release a revised version. I don't think that's going to happen tonight, given the timing of these conversations with the parliamentarian, but possibly tomorrow. Senator Thune, leader in the Senate, has said they could move to the bill tomorrow on Friday and possibly debate and vote on the bill over the weekend. If that comes to pass, they're able to move the bill tomorrow and there's 20 hours of debate on the Senate rules. And then they have what's called a vote-a-rama where the Democrats can offer amendments until they're ready to call it quits and offer amendments and have votes. That usually goes late into the evening, early morning hours until they have a final vote. So assuming they can get the bill finally drafted, ready to go to the floor tomorrow, I'd imagine that vote-a-rama will occur sometime early Sunday morning, potentially, or late Saturday night as they move forward in the process. And then if the Senate does pass the bill, there's a chance that the House could come back first part of next week to vote on the package. There has been conversations going on between the House and the Senate, trying to kind of pre-conference, if you will, various pieces of the bill, that if they get a point where the votes are there in the Senate to pass the bill, then they could have a chance to vote on the bill in the House. I think it's still kind of a question mark whether they come back or not, and whether they do have the votes to pass it. We're kind of still waiting to see what the final product looks like as they redraft the bill and go to the Senate floor. So we're kind of waiting that revised draft, and that will what will be, it'll be a substitute amendment that will basically take up the House bill, substitute amendment that'll include all the different pieces of the various committees, energy, agricultural, health, tax, etc., and go to the Senate floor for debate, amendment, and then possibly a final vote before it goes back to the House for further consideration in the process. So that's kind of what we're watching. So it's going to be, potentially a long weekend, and a lot to kind of, keep tabs on as it goes through the process the next several days. Happy to stop there, answer any questions on any particular details. We didn't go with any provisions, but maybe Ben, you can go through that if you want on the charitable side as well.
Thank you, Wes. Yeah, so that's, I think, a really important grounding in where we sit in the process and what the timeline ahead is. Regular viewers will remember that last month's monthly policy update was jointly hosted with some key partner organizations. And one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about last month was how important it was for nonprofit sector organizations to join a national sign-on letter expressing concern and opposition to 4 particularly problematic provisions that were in the House passed legislation. And before we get to how things are moving on the Hill, I want to share the latest version of that letter. So at latest count, roughly 2,300 nonprofit organizations from all 50 states are signed on in opposition to 4 key things that passed the House of Representatives. And those things are an increase in the tax rate that private foundations pay on their endowment earnings, a tax on transit benefits and parking benefits that nonprofit organizations provide to their workers, a new 1% floor, sort of disallowing the first percent of corporate charitable giving as a percentage of taxable income, and a 35% limit on the value of all itemized deductions for high-income taxpayers. And that includes the charitable deduction, of course. So the other thing that I will share most notably since our last call is that, as Wes noted, the Finance Committee has released tax legislation and its version of the language. And so we have been working real hard to talk to legislators about this, as I know have many folks on this call. And 2 of those 4 provisions are not in the current finance bill. So the tax on nonprofit parking lots and transit benefits and the increase in the private foundation tax are not currently in the latest draft from the Senate Finance Committee. That doesn't mean there is a 0% chance that they come back, but they are not in that. The 2 provisions out of 4 that we really have focused on, most notably, that are still in there is the corporate floor on charitable giving and this 35% limit on itemized deductions for high income taxpayers. So we continue to, to advocate, loudly, both directly to congressional offices and within coalitions for the removal of those provisions. Uh, so now why don't we pause for questions about sort of the overall picture on the Hill and the outlook on those provisions, or maybe on other things that are in the bill, that are in the chart, that people want to inquire about. I'm not seeing any questions yet. We'll also, note again in that chart that there are other provisions that raise revenue from the nonprofit sector by increasing the endowment tax that universities pay, by taxing nonprofit executive compensation in a new way. Both of those provisions raise revenue from our sector. Additionally, there are some things in the Senate finance version of the bill that were not in the House bill that we're not strongly opposed to. So, for example, as many know, Senator Lankford and others have spent a lot of time and effort working with our community to build support for a charitable deduction for every American, whether they itemize their taxes or not. And the Senate Finance Bill does include a new or a restored and permanent non-itemizer charitable deduction that's capped at $1,000 for individuals and $2,000 for married couples. The cost of that to the Treasury is offset by adding a 0.5% of AGI floor for itemized givers only. We think that a charitable deduction for every American permanently in a tax code is really exciting and potentially a big thing. What we don't know yet is what the impact on giving overall would be of these two pieces that are paired in our understanding by the authors of the legislation. So it's one thing that we're investigating and eager to hear from people about. I said I was pausing for questions, but then I kept talking. So final call for questions on this stuff before we turn to Travis for some other key updates.
And there is a question in the Q&A.
I see that. Thanks, Travis. So there's a question about whether the language on parking and transit includes volunteers. And I'll note that this is this parking and transit tax was initially created in the 2017 bill and ultimately repealed. And it functions, it's structured by applying the income tax to a deduction that's no longer allowed for corporations. And that deduction, in my understanding, is for employee benefits. So I don't think that volunteers would have been impacted by reimbursements. I could be mistaken about that. But the good news is that it's not in the bill. And that's one that we would be pretty surprised to see come back. So lots of focus on reconciliation, but as always with Congress, there is plenty more going on that impacts our sector and the people we serve. Over to you, Travis, for now. We'll come back to some reconciliation stuff in a few.
Great. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Wes. I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge a recent congressional hearing that some of you may have seen or heard of. So earlier this month, actually on my birthday, the House Oversight DOGE Subcommittee held a hearing with the provocative title, Public Funds, Private Agendas, NGOs Gone Wild. So this was part of a growing pattern of politically motivated scrutiny directed towards our sector. Now, we all know that trust in nonprofits remains consistently high among the public, and that's for good reason. The reality is that the vast majority of organizations are not even involved in partisan politics. According to IRS data, fewer than 5% of nonprofits even have affiliated 501c4 political arms. And only about a third, or actually slightly less than 1/3 of 501c3s even engage in lobbying at all. So their focus is where it should be, these nonprofits, feeding families, providing healthcare, educating children, and responding to urgent community needs. Of course, when an organization does step out of line, because we're not here to say that that never happens, it does occasionally, but when that does happen, there are already strong legal mechanisms in place to hold those organizations accountable. They can have their tax statuses revoked, but weaponizing political ideology against the entire sector undermines both the oversight process and the essential work that these nonprofits are all out on the ground doing across the nation, every day, in every community, everywhere. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that that happened, that hearing did happen, and we're kind of keeping an eye on that to see if anything comes of it. But related to that, I also wanted to flag another development we're keeping an eye on, that recently the House Homeland Security Committee Chairman, Congressman Mark Green, a Republican of Tennessee, sent letters to several nonprofit organizations as part of a broad investigation into whether nonprofits played any legal role facilitating undocumented immigration under the Biden administration. These letters point to over 10 million encounters at the southern border and question whether federal funding for services like shelters and translations and transportation may have been encouraging more unlawful crossings at the southern border. While congressional oversight is a very important tool in any democracy, we are concerned with the framing of this inquiry. The nonprofits under scrutiny have long histories of providing humanitarian aid, both domestically and around the globe. And that work is grounded in both legal obligation and deep moral conviction, often in partnership with the federal government. So casting this kind of service as suspect or unlawful really is sending a troubling signal. At IS, we are continuing to monitor this closely, and we will keep members informed, all of you, probably via right here on the MPU, of any major developments that do happen as they happen. And if your organization has received a letter from Chairman Green or a similar request from the federal government, whether it be from the administration or from a different congressional committee, please feel free to reach out to us. We are definitely here to help you to coordinate responses, share resources, and support you however we can. So those are all of the updates I have.
Thank you, Travis. Given the tenor of the updates you've provided, Travis, that two is plenty. Questions about the hearing or the letters from the Homeland Security Committee to nonprofits are welcome. While we work on that, I want to highlight some new research that is sort of late breaking, in fact, was just published today around the two harmful reconciliation provisions that are still in the current package, that are in the Senate Finance Bill, right? So this is the corporate floor and the 35% limit. When these provisions first came out, we admittedly weren't quite sure what their impact would be. And we felt it was really important to try to understand that, and partnered with some crackerjack researchers, and now have released, as of this morning, these findings. The 35% limit on itemized deductions has been found by researchers at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, sort of the experts on charitable giving in America, to reduce charitable giving by at least $4 to $6 billion per year. And researchers at Ernst & Young have found that the 1% corporate floor would reduce charitable giving by, in the range of $4.5 billion per year. So that's really concerning for a number of reasons. One, it's concerning because it's documentation that resources would not be flowing to the charitable sector in a meaningful way, at least $8 billion a year, and likely a good bit more than that. So that's one concern. The next concern is that people have heard us and others lamenting that this bill overall uses the nonprofit sector as a revenue source to pay for other priorities. And we object to that on its face and will continue to. What this research shows is that these provisions cost more in lost giving than they raise in revenue for the government. So even if you decided that you wanted to fund your legislation by taxing nonprofits, this is a lose-lose, these two provisions. And so that's a message that we shared with every congressional office, about an hour ago, and that we hope others will continue to emphasize, as is appropriate given the particular legislator and particular office that you're talking to. We need to get the word out about the impact on these provisions. As Wes noted, legislators have a lot on their plates right now, and they, hearing the same thing from multiple people is not just forgivable, it's welcomed. So are there any questions or comments about the research released today, about how to use it, about the contents of the finance text and where it goes from here? I guess the last thing, Wes, that I would ask if you have a quick update for us on is the appropriations process. It's something we always want to be at least keeping an eye on because it's so important for the charitable sector and has been pretty bumpy this year.
Yeah, good question, Ben. The appropriations process actually has gone off to a start in this House. They're moving a few appropriations bills through the committee process and one on the House floor. Obviously, do the easiest ones first, like military construction and ledge branch. My guess is there will probably be a slower process in the Senate, given the need to pass those on a bipartisan basis. Given the votes in the House on a more partisan basis on the appropriations process, they'll be able to probably move more bills over there than the Senate. I think we're still looking at September 30th fiscal year end. We're kind of back in a similar situation of the appropriations bills not being completed by then and having to deal with a CR sometime later in the fall. So really unclear how this ends up, but we've seen this movie before. As they move forward. So my guess is they'll probably spend a lot of July, especially in the House, moving appropriations bills as far as they can. The Senate probably a little bit behind the curve, and then end up with a CR in September, moving the process forward in the fall.
Thank you, Wes.
Yep.
We will see. We will see how that game plan unfolds. We have another question about the provisions causing more people to use donor advised funds. And I'll note that this is something that we have heard, sort of both in public, but also from congressional staff directly when talking about their concerns around in particular, the private foundation tax increase that passed the House of Representatives. This idea that if you increase taxes on the earnings of private foundation investments, that you're encouraging more people to put their money into a donor advised fund that doesn't have those same tax obligations, those same increased tax obligations. I'm not a financial advisor, but that logic sort of makes sense to us. It is not the primary reason why we've been concerned about this proposal, but it does seem logical to me. Again, that that tax increase is not in the Senate bill right now. We've heard rumors that, you know, people might try to bring it back. We're going to keep working to keep it out. I know that you all want to take that research and share it with your networks and your legislators, and I don't want to keep you from it. This is a really urgent moment for all of us to raise our voices. And so I want to thank you for joining this monthly policy update. Thank you to Wes, thank you to Travis, thank you to Manuel and Sola for helping us have this conversation. And we hope you all keep your nose to the grindstone in advocacy, but also take care of yourselves. There's a lot to do, and there will be a lot to do going forward. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.